Welcome, Mark, to the show. Really glad to have you on. I'm excited about your book here, Only Tens 2.0. I can tell by the book that you have just lived and breathed this and refined it like a master craftsman. So please let the audience know what you're up to, and let's dive in.
I'm so curious, what about the book makes you think I finally crafted it? I have ADHD, so nothing gets finally crafted in my world. It gets thrown out there and then fixed later. So the first version of that book went out with typos, grammatical errors, all kinds of stuff, because I wrote it for me, one person with ADHD trying to figure out how to run a business. I thought me and my mother would buy a copy. So 50,000 copies, the first 50,000 copies went out with all that, without, those typos and stuff, because one, I didn't think anybody would buy it. And two, I didn't know I needed a copy editor. So fire, ready, aim is kind of my thing. Now you're right. I had a new publisher. We had it redone. We added stories. We did all kinds of stuff because it turned out to be a phenomena for me. I didn't do anything to promote it. This Only Tens concept keeps coming back to me no matter where I am in the world. So for me, the whole point of it was, if you think about it, how many time management programs have you done personally? How many times have you gone in to a seminar, bought a book, or bought a Franklin Planner or something like that? Have you done that?
I have not done the Franklin Planner because I do tend to think that I'm not formally diagnosed, that I am ADHD or at least ADD. But I have done probably... I don't count them because I am ADHD, but at least it doesn't.
Right? It's a billion-dollar industry, multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
I did David Allen's Getting Things Done program twice. I went, saw him in person, sat in a room with him. I got my label maker. I got my files. I did everything twice. The problem isn't the programs. All of these programs work. Every single book that's written on time management, on attention management, on energy management, they all work. The problem for me is I lied to myself all the time. I lied to myself about what I was going to do, what I was willing to do, what I wanted to do. I lied to myself and I lied to other people. And what I noticed was I always do what I want to do, and I never do what I don't want to do. And I can say that over and over and over again. It's like, no, Mark, I don't want to pay my taxes, but I pay my taxes. No, you don't want the consequences of not paying your taxes, right? So we start to look at things and we start to realize that we only do things to avoid the consequence of not doing it or to get the reward of doing it. So like, I don't feel like sending out sales invoices. That's just, I'm a coach, man. I like to be creative. I don't want to sit there in QuickBooks, but I want my money. So I'll do the QuickBooks, right? So that was an epiphany for me with the ADD, I really have to look at my motivations for things. And once I started to tell the truth about what I was willing to do, what I wanted to do, the sacrifices I was willing to make, then all the time management programs worked. So that's the whole point of Only Tens, is to start to get honest with myself about, who I am, what I want, and what I want to do.
Well, I love that's actually what caught my eye on the cover of the book. Was above the title. You say you don't have a time management problem, you have an honesty problem. And I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be good. So, I read a lot in the book. And by the way, one of the things I loved, where it's like, sometimes the best thing a leader can do is just go to Starbucks and think without distractions. And I think that's, if you can talk to me about where that came from, because I came to a similar conclusion. Well, teaching, it wasn't conclusion, when I read Lee Iacocca's book years ago after he turned around Chrysler, called Iacocca, because what he did every Sunday night was retire to his office at home, and for 2 hours, basically look at, okay, what were my to-dos last week? How did I do? What do I need to do this week to keep the company afloat? And then he planned his week. So talk to me about this thing of, for a moment, as a sidebar, that leaders can be so busy, they just don't take the time to think. They're just constantly moving.
That piece that's for all leaders. All leaders have to learn that. It's very hard. The old dogs are hard to get to sit down and work on their vision and strategy versus the tactical. But that came specifically because I coach a lot of new leaders, a lot of young people who got promoted because they're really good at what they did. So they get promoted because they're better at sales. They're better at this. They're better at engineering. They're better at whatever it is than anybody else. Then they get promoted to some level of leadership, some vice president role, and they're in charge of a whole organization. But what their skill is doing, right? So it's the individual contributor to success through others. So the two things that they don't understand when they get promoted is, one, it's not their job to do their job anymore, right? It's a whole new job. So setting the vision and setting the strategy of the organization versus the tactical is their job. So going to Starbucks and sitting down and thinking about what they want to do and how they want to lead is the piece. The second piece they never understand is the higher you go up on the ladder, the more your job as a coach than anything else. Your coaching skills as you move up the ladder is, motivating people, dealing with people, not getting triggered by people. How many conversations? Just got off with a client and we were just talking about how awful the people in this new organization he took over is. They're just all awful. And I'm like, yes, people are awful. People are a pain in the ass. People are petty and small and childish, and they don't do what you want to do. And guess what? So are we. So are you, right? So now you have to make a choice. Do you want to lead this group of people? You can go back to being an individual contributor. You don't have to lead these people. But and he says, no, I want to be the leader of this organization. Great. If you want to be the leader of the organization, you need to choose it. Stop being a victim of the fact that humans are going to just human all over you. Choose to be the leader of these people. We're going to work on being triggered. We're going to work on being petty. We're going to work on now leading them, teaching them, motivating the soft skills that you don't feel like you have time for. And it's that choice to be where you want to, where you say you want to be.
Yeah.
You're sending me off on these rants.
No, I like rants. Rants are great. And I just got a rant this morning from a guy who's an ER doc in Boston. And he was ranting about how nurses don't know how to do basic math. They graduated from nursing school and they don't know how to divide 10 in half to do the right dose of medicine. And if they do the wrong dose, they can really hurt somebody. And also their bedside manners are terrible. They're soft skills. That's why we, quite frankly, I'm spending most of my time in the other side of our business now in Habitly, where we teach soft skills. But I think I'd like you to rant a little bit more on what you were talking to this person about. You got to make a choice. And I love the fact you brought up that you, as a leader, now in a leadership role, have to learn soft skills. But you also brought up, he has to decide, how am I going to teach my people those soft skills that I assumed they would have?
Right. But before any leader has to learn how to teach their people these things, they have to choose that that's their job to do so. And that's the piece. That's why I, as an executive coach, I don't know if you find this, that's why I have a thriving business, because most CEOs don't want to do this work. They don't want to do, they don't want to grow their team up, so they hire someone like me to do it, which is, I'm very, very grateful. But at some point, you got to choose that that's your job. You went from one thing to now you're a people person. So now once you do that, now you can choose how you do it. Do you bring in training? Do you go training yourself, right? You can only bring people as far as you are, right? If you don't hold yourself accountable, how are you going to hold your team accountable? Can't tell you how many people I've talked to, who run multi-million-dollar organizations who don't keep their word to themselves when they say they're going to go to the gym, or don't keep their word to their kids. And then they wonder why their sales teams aren't keeping up with the goals that they're setting. Let's talk about holding yourself accountable. Let's just spend 2 weeks holding you accountable to going to the gym, not because you have to go to the gym, but because you said you wanted to go to the gym. Let's do that for 2 weeks, and let's just see what happens to the flavor of your meetings. After you are comfortable holding yourself accountable for just one thing, and it's miraculous.
So I love that, because you're basically saying they've got to be a role model. They can't require behavior of somebody else that they're not. It's not a habit of their own. And so talk to me about that with the only 10th. So here they have to go to the gym for a week or two. And it's one of those things that they say is a 10, but their behavior is saying it's about a 3. Right. So talk to me about that. I mean, how do you work through that?
So again, it's telling the truth to yourself. So, one guy I talked to, he wasn't taking care of himself, and he wasn't particularly working that hard. And I said, and a client, so he pays me a lot of money. I said, you know what your problem is? And he said, what? I said, you have it too good. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, you've been working at half speed, right? And you've got the new beautiful girlfriend. You've got plenty of money in the bank, right? You don't have to worry about, lifting weights and losing all this weight. Like, you just don't care. Things are too good. And he's like, I don't know, Mark. And then he comes back and he goes, you're right. Like, I don't when you were single, you were in the gym every single day. When you were first an entrepreneur, you were working all day, all night, and you were pushing rocks up the hill when you needed to push rocks up in the hill. Now you're fat and happy. He's like, God, man, that makes perfect sense. And what we wound up doing was closing one of his businesses that he wasn't really interested in pushing up the hill, so he could focus on another business. It was brilliant. Now he's completely focused on the business that he really cares about.
Yeah. And I'm curious about another aspect about what you're saying, because what you indicated a moment ago is that, let's say that your people need training, like soft skills, competitive soft skills training, but you don't want to do it. You certainly don't want to write the training. You don't want to deliver the training. And you may not even want to hold people accountable that they're applying anything from the training. So how does that work? Do you then have like a 10 item on your list that's, I'm going to check the metrics to make certain this is happening. It's still a 10 for me, but I've actually delegated it. Can you have delegated 10s?
Of course. In fact, if it's a 10, if you're a leader and it's a 10, you probably should delegate it to make sure it gets done. Then your 10 is the feedback loop of making sure it's getting done, making sure it's getting done correctly, watching the impact of that. So your 10s are no longer doing the thing. Your 10s are keeping track of and holding people accountable. But there is one problem with that. I've never seen an organization succeed where the leadership didn't live the principles that it was teaching the people that that they wanted. I just haven't seen that. You bring in the training, you do all that stuff, and how many times you've been in an organization, you do the training for the team, and the team's like, yeah, but they're not going to do it. They don't keep their word. They don't like it, and it doesn't stick. But let's go back to 10. Let's go back to what a 10 is. So for me, what I learned that, have you ever heard the author Derek Sivers, prolific writer? He was a business guy. He's a philosopher, writer, thinker guy now. And he has this concept called hell yes or hell no. There's no maybe. It's either a hell yes or a hell no. If it's a maybe, it's a hell no for now. Right. So for me, the 10s were when I kind of whined to my coach, that I've really pared things down to only the important things. And with the ADD, I just can't seem to get things done. Now, when I was a sales guy and when I had a hierarchy of leadership to be accountable to, I got my stuff done. I was a great sales guy, not because I was a great sales guy. I was afraid of my sales managers, right? I hated disappointing people. I was really competitive. I wanted to see my name at the top of the leaderboard, right? Yeah. So I had that going. Now that I'm an entrepreneur and I work for myself, I have a shitty sales manager, right? It's really bad. So what I realized, I said to my coach, I'm not getting anything done. He goes, Mark, I don't think it's true that you don't get anything done. He says, and he points to a story I told him way back in 2009. I got really, really sick. I was depressed and I was suicidal. My marriage had fallen apart, and I really didn't think I was going to live. I got misdiagnosed, and I was sure I was going to die. And I made the decision that if I'm going to die, I need to leave $1 million for my ex-wife and my kids. And I wanted to run the Marine Corps marathon. I heard some guy on the radio say everybody could run. I couldn't run a mile. I was so sick. I said, I'm going to run the Marine Corps marathon. I'm going to make $1 million. I'm going to give $60,000 to charity just to make up for how much I hate myself that year. And that year, I made the money. I gave the money to charity. I ran the Marine Corps marathon in an hour shorter than I possibly could. And so at the end of the year, I was healthier than I'd ever been. My career was soaring again. My ex-wife and kids were doing good and all that. And so my coach put that in my face. He said, when you wanted to run a marathon, when you couldn't run a mile, you did it. And that was when the light bulb went on. Oh, so I put things on my list. I put 7s and 8s on my list. And I say I'm going to do them because I should do them. It's a good idea. Or I said yes to someone. And then I started to realize that the things that I put on my list that, the should have been done yesterday list were things I was lying to myself about. It was all bullshit, right? It was, or it was things I committed to people because as a recovering people pleaser, I'm all things to all people, only always. Why? Because I'm smart, I'm energetic, and because I can be. When it started to fall apart, though, things start dropping out when you try to be all things to all people and you say yes to things. I had an automatic yes to everything. Sure, I'll be the committee chair for the Boy Scouts. Sure, I'll coach basketball. Sure, I'll make a $10 million goal. Sure, I'll stop on the way home to pick up milk. And I realized that there were things on my list that I didn't want to do, but I didn't have the courage to have a conversation, to set a boundary, to ask for a different due date, to negotiate, right? I didn't realize that I didn't have the people skills to actually navigate my to-do list. Everything on my to-do list had something to do with a fear, with a should, with, how I operated in the world. And my joke is I can look at anybody's to-do list and within a half hour, I can tell you what you're afraid of, what your values are, how you grew up, and what makes you tick. I can read them like tea leaves. Because most of the things, if you look at your to-do list, there's a story behind everything on your to-do list. And here's the mission part of the whole thing. Is I woke up at some point and I was like, oh my God, I have lived for other people my whole entire life. I've never thought about, what do I want out of life? What do I want to spend my time and my energy and my attention on? Almost dying really gives you that clarity. And then I watch everybody around me running around and working so hard. And I watch, we go to our kickoffs in Las Vegas, and I watch everybody, slipping through each other's rooms, and what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I watch people getting dead drunk, right, and all kinds of stuff. And I realize that the price that we have agreed upon to be in the 1%. It's just not inevitable. We don't talk about the cost. I have friends who at 50 years old, bought a Bentley and died a month later, right? Because we just ran ourselves into the ground because we weren't honest about what we wanted. We felt trapped in the lives that we had and didn't know that we could do something different.
Okay, so you're killing me here because you're giving me like 49 different questions, to ask.
This wasn't the conversation I was planning on having, so I can't help you. No,
it's all good. So and you talked about, if you're overwhelmed, you're probably doing somebody else's job in the book, which is a great concept. And I want to. So I'll try to remember as much as I can, but I have a tiny brain. My brother used to say I'm like a dinosaur, big body, small brain. So. But the concept, something you said here is really important. I want to call it out to the audience. You said a people pleaser. And the people pleaser is, you're always doing things for other people. But I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the people pleaser side, that you do things out of fear.
Right. So again, I always thought I was altruistic. I always thought I was such a nice guy because I would do things for other people, not realizing that I only did things for other people because I wanted the feedback that I was a nice guy. I wanted people to like me. I didn't want people to be mad at me. I did, I wanted to be seen as competent. I would say yes to things that I didn't have time to do because I just wanted to seem more than I was. It was never about the kindness. It was never about the giving. It wasn't about service. Yes, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I was a good person, but most of my motivation was in getting the feedback from the world that I'm enough. That I'm good enough, right? That I'm liked enough, that I'm loved.
That's right. So did part of it come from somewhere? I mean, it's amazing what we learn when we're wounded. Okay, I'm 65. I'm not here on this podcast to tell my story, but same type of thing. I can sit with people and cut through stuff real easy because I've gone through hell and I've got the scars on my back like yourself. So, but was part of your wounds getting this mantra of you're not good enough. And so being the people pleaser was a way to meet that or overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was 27, I was homeless, living in my truck. I drove into Washington, D.C., 135 pounds. I was pretty much a mess. And my brother helped me get sober and clean. And so I spent the rest of my life, it took me about 8 years to become a millionaire. And driving, a fancy car and live in a nice house and all that. And the joke is I'm a short Jewish Tony Robbins. But For me, all the success, everything I did was to cover up the fact that I was a waiter well into my 30s, right? That I didn't have a college education until I was about 41, right? Like it took me all those years to actually become a 22-year-old, and I wanted to erase all that. So for me, that was always the motivation, to be all things to all people all the time. So that, I do remember someone once told me, someone who I cared about, she called me a taker in my 20s. She said, you're a taker. You're just a taker. And when I got sober, that rang in my ears so loudly, that I'm a taker, that I never let anybody help me after that. I would take money from people and steal money and do all this stuff before. Now it's like, nobody can help me with anything because I'm a taker. And it took me, in my 40s to learn how to let people help me, right? That I'm worthy of people supporting me and helping me and being part of something. Big deal. So you're right. All of this stuff comes from trauma in childhood.
Wow. Yeah. So, and we live in a nation right now, possibly a world, where there is more trauma, I think, happening than ever before, but that's a separate podcast. So I'd like to go back to the 10s. So I think if we're going to be candid with our audience, everybody that's listening right now still struggles with their priorities to some degree. So in the time that we have remaining, which is, 5-10 minutes, whatever, what would you challenge people with that to help them better understand? I'm sure you've seen the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller.
Sure.
Yeah. So Gary nailed it down to one thing. If I do this one thing, everything else gets easier or unnecessary. But what you're teaching, which is super important, is, daily, maybe hourly, but at least weekly, you're really focused on truly what are my 10s, which, if I've heard you correctly and read correctly in your book, is a combination of what am I really passionate about? What do I want to do that I have the ability to do either myself or through others? So what advice would you give to the audience here on how to get that focus? And it's funny, you talk about that guy, hell yes or hell no. And then it reminds me of Yoda, there is no try, there's only do, right. All this stuff. It's all great, but we don't do it.
So here's the definition of a 10. A 10 has to be done by me, and has to be done by me today. That's it. Has to be done by me. It has to be done by me today, or I really have juice to do it. So, I have an idea for a blog post. I feel like doing that. Right. So so if you narrow it down to there, I would love people to just write down everything on their to-do list. Take a look at your to-do list, look at it. Now look at it with a different eye. Like, what's on there that's really yours to do? It's something you wanted to do. It's something important, whether it's personal, whether it's a business idea, whether it's something that's your responsibility because you want to avoid the consequence or you want the reward. Now look at the things that are on your list because someone said you should do it or asked you to do it and you didn't set a boundary. Start looking at the qualifiers on the list of why things are on your list, and be like a sorcerer and look beyond the thing itself to how it got on the list in the first place. Now, what happens is what that reveals is the difficult conversations you need to have, the honest conversations you need to have with people about getting those things off your list. Oh, I said I would do X. When I said it, I bit off more than I can chew. I'm going to have to decline. Oh my God, if you're a people pleaser, that is worse than, I'd rather slit my throat than tell someone I'm not going to meet an expectation they have of me, right? So you start to see that what you're really afraid of is being honest with people and having these conversations. But
so let me ask you a question. I want you to hold your thought, which is difficult with ADHD. But I wanted to ask you, so when I say that to somebody, is it partially my responsibility to think of making a suggestion of, I cannot do this, but here's a way you can get it done, or here's somebody else who can do it.
Absolutely, you have to take responsibility for saying yes to it in the first place. And you can say, honey, you're a 10 for me. I love you. I care about you. Is it okay if I do this in 2 weeks instead of this week?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or, because I really am a big believer of taking responsibility for the things you put on your plate that time, and then use that as a learning to not put things on your plate later. Yeah. Right. So that's a huge one. But for me, there's 3 stages of setting boundaries. And it's really hard to be all loving and all that when you're just learning to do that. The first is you take on too much, you get overwhelmed, and you blow up, and you're just like, I can't do it, and you blow up at people and push them back. The next is you get apologetic. It's like, I really want to say yes. I really want to be the committee chair for the Boy Scouts. It's but I really can't. You start to, just obsequious, and it's really not empowering, and you don't look like a strong man when you're doing it. But it's at least you're setting a boundary. And then finally, when you start to learn boundaries, then now you can say, I'd love to do that. I know you need the help. I cannot do that. That's not something that I can put on my plate. Right. And you can do it with a loving voice. You can, with compassion. But if you're just new to this, it's really, you got to it's so hard to do that. People, for me, what I notice is if you're a people pleaser, someone asks you to do something, and then you wind up, you're mad that they asked you to do it. If you notice that you're mad that they asked you to do it, has nothing to do with them asking. People have a right to ask you anything they want. It's your job to say no. You're pissed because you don't feel like saying no. You don't like the feelings that come up when saying no, right? So there's always something behind the thing.
Yeah, or you're pissed because you said yes. And it's like, oh no, now I have to do this. Or, oh no, now I have to go back and tell them I can't do this.
I was just talking to an executive who was lamenting about all the meetings he was in. And he's like, oh my God, I'm in all these meetings. I don't need to be in these meetings. This is terrible. Oh my God. I'm like, would you stop being such a victim? Sometimes I think to myself, how do you talk to these? Why do you talk? He's like, what do you mean I'm a victim? I said, you don't have to go to any of these meetings. And he said, yeah, I have to go to these meetings. I said, do you really? You just said you didn't. They're superfluous. He goes, yeah, but people expect me to be there. I said, okay. The next time you walk into a meeting, I want you to stand at the door, and I want you to either one, decide why you need to be in the meeting. Why is that meeting important? And when you walk in that room, only walk in that room choosing to be in that meeting. You choose that you said yes to this meeting for some reason, that there's a reason you're in there, and you go to that meeting and you fully be in that meeting. If you can't do that, you need to turn around and walk away. It's like, really? I said, yeah. I said, nobody wants you in that meeting if you don't want to be in the meeting. And if you're a victim in a victim mentality, when you walk in that meeting, you're not the leader. So if you're going to be in the meeting, be in the meeting. Now, learn from this exercise, and I'm making them do it for 2 weeks, is you're going to start saying no ahead of time to a lot of meetings because you don't need to be in most of those meetings, just like you said.
Yeah.
So it was rich, but it's really hard. It's so much easier to, we all do that victim whiny thing. And when you catch yourself, it's, grow yourself up and, like, I choose this.
Yeah. I had an executive I was coaching a couple of months ago, same situation. Guy has no time and, working nights, weekends, and now he's got a child, and it's like wake up call. So one of the pieces I told him was, I said, so first of all, you have to, before you say yes, figure out, do you have something unique to contribute to the meeting? Or are you going to gain something from that meeting you cannot gain from somebody sending you a PDF or an email or something else, where you can get the same information? And the second thing, so then you decide, do I need to be in the meeting or not? Then if you decide you need to be in the meeting, is it a meeting where you only need to be there for 15 minutes, not an hour or 2 hours, the full meeting? Because you're only going to interact on one piece. Then they're going to cover other stuff, but you don't need to be there for the other stuff. And it just totally opened up his calendar.
Life-changing, but you don't think about this stuff on your own. That's why coaches exist, because you don't think about this stuff on your own.
Yeah, it is amazing. Many, many years ago, I read about Eric Schmidt when he became CEO of Google. And he was working with, I think the guy's name was Bill Thompson, who had been the president of Apple for a while, as his coach. So here he was, CEO of Google, when it was growing really rapidly. I mean, here was a super sharp guy. He was the CEO of Novell. And he's got a coach. And that was decades ago, but it just struck me as like a guy at that level needs a coach. And I just, I want to reinforce what you're saying. I think that when you look at it, you see super smart people like that. Why do they need a coach? They need that person for insight, because the way you've spoken so bluntly, and don't find a coach that's like one of those therapists that's just going to nod their head and say, oh, yes, I understand you're having trouble. You want the coach that's going to whack you on the side of the head and say, like you said, don't be a victim. Like, what? You're fat and happy. What? That's the coach you want to pay for, because your people next to you won't tell you that. They won't give you that kind of accountability. And so I think it's great, the stories you're telling and the tens. I think, and you think about, forgive me, interrupt me if you want, but I'm a little rant on your book. So this whole concept of only tens and how you do that, think about everybody who's listening right now. If you could only have tens that you worked on every day, what would happen in 2022 and beyond if you could do that? So one question I have for you is, so you're saying each day you only have tens. So when do you define the tens? And how often do you look at them during the day? Or do you just wait till the next morning to hold yourself accountable?
I don't have to look at them during the day, because my tens are, there's only, if it's a 10, it's usually 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 things. It's a 10. Yeah. I'm not saying I'm only going to do 4 things in a day, but when I looked at the list before, I spun out so much in the overwhelm of the list that when I picked out my tens and I put them on my whiteboard, and I put those 3 things on my whiteboard, that those are the things, if it's 11 o'clock at night and I went to bed and I didn't get it done, I commit to getting out of bed and getting it done again, that kind of thing. What I found was I would get those things done, and then I had juice to do all these other things. So after 3 or 4 days of just doing tens, I started doing the 6 and 7. I don't want to call them 6 and 7s. I throw everything that's not a 10 out the window, right? And we have to go a little bit deeper into that to say why. But if it's not a 10, then it shouldn't be on the list. But I wind up doing things that are going to be a 10 next week. Things that I know are they have on what I call a radar. These are 10s that are 10, not 10s today, but they're going to be 10s next week or 10s next month. And I want to just have them there. And then I wind up doing those things. But I also wound up having just so much more creative juice to get the things done that I needed to get done. I just stopped freezing up so much. And every time I do freeze up, I go back to my list. So the tens list, I do the tens list on Sunday night or Monday morning for the week. I do my week's tens. And then every morning I decide what my tens are for that day. What absolutely has to get done, right? So tomorrow I'm getting cataract surgery. So I'm out all day tomorrow. There's a few things that just really need to get done today before tomorrow. Right. Yeah. One was rescheduled because again, I'm all things to all people. I had clients scheduled because I thought, oh, it's okay. I'll have cataract surgery in the morning and I'll coach in the afternoon. and then
Overachiever.
The doctor was like, no, that's not going to be happening. So I had to call all of them. Like, are you guys okay if we just move? They're like, no, Mark, yes, we'll move it. I said, okay, that's cool. So like my tens for today are make sure those clients are taken care of, right? Make sure that something for my dogs are taken care of. And that's it. Those are the tens. I'll do more, but now I know my tens are taken care of.
Yeah. Are there certain days where, because of the magnitude of it, there's only one 10?
Yeah. There's plenty of days that there's only one 10.
But as an overachiever, that was probably something you had to learn, right? Because you were used to having 47 things to do in a day.
Here's where I lied to myself. As an overachiever, I put 30 things on the list and wound up doing 3 things that weren't even on the list, right? Like, so, the whole overachiever thing is a little bit of a misnomer, unless you have that specific personality where you're just, that's the other end of the spectrum from the ADD and the procrastination, is you just have to get everything done all the time and do everybody else's work also. But no, the tens, what the 10 is. If you got hit by a bus in the afternoon, you know what needs to be done in the morning. right? And it's really, when you're a leader, it's really hard to do it and I do these with my Mastering Overwhelm workshop. I do them with leadership teams, and they're like, Mark, I have 30 10s for today. I'm like, okay, let's go over it. And then we go over what's a should, what should be delegated, what is on the list. One of my favorite things to say is, so what was on the list today that was on the list yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before? And they're like, well, like 6 of them. I said, oh, so they were 10s then too, right? They're obviously not 10s. Let's really look at this. And then they come down and they go, well, actually, I only have 3 10s for today. Like, exactly. You can do more, but there's only 3 things that really need your attention today. So here's the way I'm going to help, because you and I I went off ADD tangent today and talked about things I didn't plan on talking about. I made a page of videos for your listeners so that they can actually go over they don't even have to read the book. Most of my clients will not read my entire book. So I have to make these little 5-minute videos. So I put a bunch of 5-minute videos on a page that's specifically for your people with Manage to Win at the top, so that they can learn this by themselves. Great.
Give me the URL of that, but why don't you
it's a little bit long. It's masteringOverwhelm.markjsilverman. So we'll just give you the URL and you can put it in your show notes.
Yeah. I'll put it in the show notes. That's great. And if they want to get a hold of you, how do they do that, Mark? I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for the rest of the day, but you have other 10s to get to, so we can't do that. So
it's you just go to my website, markjsilverman.com, marktheletterjsilverman.com, and you can go there. Go in the show notes to find these videos. You can still get there, but it's easier this way. And you can see my podcast, Mastering Overwhelm, and find my book and that kind of stuff.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the book. And just keep doing what you're doing, man. This is just great.
Thank you. We're kindred spirits. I love what you're putting out in the world. So thank you for having me.